Stretching over 5 million square miles, Antarctica is covered in ice sheets that reach more than a mile deep. The average daily temperature is negative 49 degrees Fahrenheit, and wind speeds can reach over 100 miles per hour.
For decades, Antarctica has been the world's most heavily guarded secret. Not because of its weather, not because of its ice, but because of what multiple governments have allegedly gone to extraordinary lengths to keep buried beneath it. Literally and figuratively, scientists have been silenced. Military personnel have signed lifetime non-disclosure agreements. Satellite imagery has been digitally scrubbed. And for more than 70 years, the official position from every major world government has been the same. There is nothing down there worth talking about. But now, something unexpected has cracked this wall of silence open. Not a whistleblower, not a leaked document, not a rogue journalist breaking a story the mainstream media won't touch. An artificial intelligence, Grok AI.
Elon Musk's XAI has released its newest AI model, Grok 4, I believe as of 4 a.m. UK time, so about 3 hours, been live for 3 hours. What can we expect when it comes to this new iteration?
The powerful reasoning system developed by XAI has done what no single human investigator could do alone. It has taken decades of scattered testimonies, declassified fragments, satellite anomalies, and suppressed field data, and run them all through a single analytical framework. The result is a pattern so consistent, so geometrically impossible to explain away, that the researchers who reviewed Grok's output reportedly went quiet for a very long time before any of them said a word. What Grok found, or rather, what Grok confirmed, aligns with accounts that Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist Linda Moulton Howe has spent over 40 years assembling from military personnel, Navy engineers, geophysicists, logistics coordinators, and classified intelligence officers. These were not fringe voices. These were credentialed professionals, people with service records, security clearances, and reputations built over entire careers. People who had every reason to stay silent and who chose, often on their deathbeds, to speak anyway. And what they described, every single one of them, is the same thing. Something massive, ancient and engineered, is buried beneath more than 2 miles of Antarctic ice. And according to what Grok's analysis surfaced from years of suppressed and scattered data, the evidence has been hiding in plain sight the entire time. Are you ready for what they actually found? Because once you understand the full picture, you will never look at Antarctica the same way again. The frozen archive nobody wanted you to see. Let's start with a question that should bother everyone who has ever thought seriously about this topic. Why does Antarctica need a no-fly zone, not a research exclusion zone, not a temporary weather corridor, a permanent, unmarked, restricted airspace that appears on no public aviation chart, a zone that military pilots have quietly acknowledged for decades, where civilian flights are turned back without explanation and military clearances are required at levels almost nobody in the operational chain actually holds. A pilot who flew dozens of missions across the continent described this zone to Linda Moulton Howe in precise terms. When he asked a superior what was in that area, the answer was 4 words: sensitive research, stop asking. Bot exchange should tell you something, because governments do not create classified no-fly zones over empty ice. They create them over things they cannot afford to have anyone photograph from the air. Now here is where Grok AI enters the equation in a way that changes everything. When researchers fed decades of Antarctic anomaly data into Grok's analytical engine, witness accounts, radar survey records, NSF logistics manifests, satellite imagery metadata, and declassified Operation High Jump documents, the AI did not just process the information, it identified the structural logic underneath it. It found the connective tissue between testimonies that had previously seemed disconnected. And what emerged from that analysis was not speculation. It was a repeating pattern, consistent across sources that had never communicated with each other, pointing to the same geographic coordinates, the same depth ranges, and the same description of what was down there. Grok's output essentially confirmed what Linda had spent 40 years assembling one piece at a time. The data is not scattered. It has always been coherent. It was only the artificial fragmentation, the classification, the suppression, the deliberate scrubbing that made it look incoherent. Now the picture is coming together, and it is staggering.
Yeah. We've had to go get people that used the GPS inappropriately and got themselves in a situation where they got lost. And there's also been people that have been lost in whiteouts and basically died of exposure.
The man on the ridge, where it all began. Before we get to what Grok's analysis revealed, you need to understand where this investigation started. Because the chain of evidence that eventually fed into Grok's framework begins with a single moment on a frozen ridge in 1982. A Navy flight engineer, a man whose name Linda has protected for decades and still will not release, was on what should have been a routine supply run from McMurdo Station to a remote research camp deep in the Antarctic interior. Somewhere over the interior ice sheet, equipment failed. The crew was forced down onto an exposed ridge in conditions that were savage even by Antarctic standards. Wind hammering the fuselage. Temperatures where exposed skin begins to burn in seconds. The kind of place where you make repairs fast and you leave. While the crew worked, this flight engineer stepped away from the aircraft and looked out across the ridge. He stopped. Something on the horizon was wrong. Shapes that did not belong. Geometric, symmetrical, angular in ways that ice formations simply are not. Too precise, too regular, too deliberate. He moved closer, close enough to make out what appeared to be the upper portion of a massive structure, partially exposed where decades of wind erosion had stripped the ice away. It was solid, it was angular, and it was made of something that was clearly, unmistakably not natural. Then the radio crackled. Orders from McMurdo. Return immediately. No explanation. No questions. When they landed, intelligence officers were already waiting on the ground. The crew was separated. Each member was debriefed individually. Flight logs were classified on the spot. Non-disclosure agreements were signed, and the instruction given to every member of that crew was 5 words. This never happened. Move on. The flight engineer moved on. For 16 years, he said nothing. Then, in 1998, retired, and in his 70s, he contacted Linda Moulton Howe. He gave her coordinates, exact dates, the names of other crew members on that flight. She spent months verifying everything. His service record checked out. His credentials were confirmed. The names he gave her led to other trails she could follow. She filed his testimony, told no one, and waited. She had no idea what she had just opened.
Today, the only inhabitants of this barren landscape are scientists who work in research stations scattered across the continent.
The pattern emerges, and Grok sees it first. Over the next 2 decades, they came to her one by one. And here is what makes this story different from every Antarctic conspiracy you have ever heard before. These witnesses did not know each other. They had never compared notes. They had been stationed at different bases in different decades, working in completely different roles. Some were scientists, some were military contractors, some were pilots, logistics officers, imagery analysts, and they all told the same story. A geophysicist who had conducted ice-penetrating radar surveys sat across from Linda and described findings he had never been allowed to publish. His radar had returned readings of massive voids beneath the ice, not small pockets, not geological air bubbles, but enormous cavities with geometrically regular dimensions that matched no natural cave formation in any database he had ever consulted. When he flagged the data, his supervisor's face went pale. The readings were classified within hours. His entire team was reassigned. He never saw that data again. A Navy construction battalion member described being deployed to a classified excavation site located miles from any official research station. No scientific briefing, no Ice Core mission, just drilling straight down. And at the bottom of that shaft, he saw metallic surfaces. Walls that looked manufactured, smooth, deliberate, and perfect in ways that geology cannot produce. A scientist from an Argentine research team told Linda that artifacts pulled from Antarctic ice cores, artifacts dated to over 12,000 years old, were confiscated by military personnel every single time they surfaced. No logs, no published papers, gone, as if they had never existed. A satellite imagery analyst described watching specific Antarctic coordinates get digitally scrubbed from public data, not reduced in resolution, actively erased. He had seen the originals before processing, rectilinear shapes, engineered formations. When he raised it with supervisors, he was told those areas were under special access protocols. None of his concern. Now stop and ask yourself this. What are the odds that a geophysicist in one decade, a construction worker in another, a pilot in a third, and an imagery analyst in a fourth, none of whom ever communicated with each other, would independently describe the same thing, in the same location, and then independently be silenced in exactly the same way? Grok AI ran that probability analysis. The convergence across independent testimony streams, when mapped against the geographical coordinates provided and the timeline of suppression events, produced a pattern that the AI flagged as statistically non-coincidental. In Grok's own framework of analysis, this level of consistency across unconnected sources spanning multiple decades and multiple governments is not characteristic of fabrication. It is characteristic of a shared encounter with a real phenomenon. That is a significant statement. Let it land.
I have seen the photographs of humanoids that are based in Antarctica, and that what he has seen with his own eyes 2 miles down under ice are hieroglyphs that archaeologists that he was in, that was the mission.
The NORAD officer, the testimony that connected everything. By 2016, Linda Moulton Howe had accumulated years of fragmented but consistent testimony. Each account was credible on its own, but each one was also isolated, a piece of something she could not yet see in full. Then she received a message from someone she would later describe as the most credible source she had encountered in her entire investigative career. He was a retired NORAD officer. He had held classified clearances at levels most military personnel never reach. He had been part of an Antarctic operation in the early 2000s that exists in no public record, under no public designation, in no publicly accessible government archive. And when he began speaking to Linda, she went quiet, because what he described did not just add to what she already had. It connected it, every isolated account, every fragmented detail, every unexplained gap from 20 years of interviews. It all locked into place, according to what this officer was briefed on and what he personally witnessed. Beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, at a depth of approximately 2 miles, there are multiple structures of artificial origin. Not geological anomalies, not ice formations, not anything that belongs in a geology textbook. These are structures that were built, engineered with precision and intention, and they are old, far older than the ice that covers them. They predate the last ice age. That means they were constructed when Antarctica was a temperate continent, when it had rivers, forests, and a climate that could support life. Over 12,000 years ago, thousands of years before the first Sumerian city, thousands of years before the earliest Egyptian dynasty, before every civilization that history has ever called ancient, the NORAD officer told Linda these structures were first detected in the 1940s during Operation High Jump, the massive U.S. Antarctic expedition led by Admiral Richard Byrd between 1946 and 1947. Officially, that mission was about establishing research bases and conducting polar training. But the classified layer of that operation, according to this source, was something else entirely. Seismic surveys had returned anomalies deep beneath the ice that no one could explain and no one was authorized to discuss. And here is the piece that should freeze you in place. Since those initial detections in the 1940s, the United States, Russia, and more recently China have been running covert recovery operations across Antarctica, not research missions, recovery missions, archaeological excavation, and technological retrieval, conducted in total secrecy, entirely separate from the public science programs operating under the Antarctic Treaty. What has been found, according to the NORAD officer, appears to be an extensive complex: buildings, infrastructure, technology, a civilization so advanced and so ancient that its very existence would overturn every assumption we hold about the development of human history, and some of the technology recovered from those structures. Pay close attention to this. Some of it still works. Not all of it is understood, but functional devices have been recovered, and they are currently being studied at classified facilities. When Linda asked him to prove it, he gave her coordinates. He gave her internal documents, redacted, but showing classified project designations at the exact locations he had described, and he gave her names, people she could find, people she could call. Linda sat with all of it and understood that, after 2 decades, she was no longer holding fragments. She was holding a single, complete, devastating story.
Antarctica is the last frontier. It holds our imagination. Old maps that said, "Here be monsters." The last remaining territory on the planet that could have such a designation is Antarctica.
What Grok found in the data gap. Here is where the Grok AI analysis becomes genuinely historic in its implications. For decades, the most frustrating aspect of Antarctic investigation has been the data gap. Researchers know where to look. Witnesses have provided coordinates. Satellite anomalies have been reported. But the data itself, the ice-penetrating radar surveys, the seismic readings, the geological core records from the regions in question, has either been classified, denied, or simply does not appear in any public scientific repository. That absence of data is itself a data point, and it is one that human investigators have long struggled to articulate in a way that holds up to scrutiny. Grok AI changed that. When researchers mapped the geographical distribution of data suppression events, classified radar surveys, confiscated core samples, denied satellite image requests, reassigned science teams against the specific coordinates provided by Linda's witnesses over 25 years, the alignment was not approximate, it was precise. The areas where data is missing are the areas her sources identified. The regions where satellite imagery has been scrubbed are the regions her NORAD officer provided coordinates for. The zones where geological research requests have been denied on national security grounds are the zones where her geophysicist flagged unexplained cavity readings. You do not suppress geological data from an empty continent on national security grounds. You suppress it because the geology is not actually what is down there. Grok's analysis also cross-referenced the material evidence Linda's witnesses described against known scientific anomalies in Antarctic research literature. A material scientist who briefly analyzed samples from an Antarctic recovery operation told Linda the alloys he examined matched nothing in any known database. Corrosion resistance that was off the charts. Strength-to-weight ratios that current materials science cannot reproduce. Manufacturing signatures that no known industrial process has ever generated. When Grok ran those material property descriptions against the full landscape of known and theoretical materials science, the conclusion was stark. The material characteristics described by that scientist are not consistent with any naturally occurring substance and are not consistent with any human manufacturing process currently on record. Someone made those materials, and whoever made them was working with knowledge we do not yet possess.
We're not talking a few symbols. We're talking whole walls, 40 feet high, completely covered with symbols that the archaeologist says are somewhere in between Mayan and Egyptian and are neither.
The contractor who went down the shaft. Among all of the testimonies Linda assembled over 25 years, one stands apart from the rest, not because it is the most comprehensive, but because of the circumstances under which it was given. A military contractor who had worked a classified drilling operation in 2003 agreed to speak to Linda for one reason only: He was dying, terminal cancer, and he could not carry what he had seen into death without telling someone. He described being lowered into an ice shaft that had been drilled to access what his operational briefing called a geological anomaly. The descent took a long time. The platform creaked as it dropped deeper into the shaft, foot by foot. Daylight above shrank to a coin and then disappeared entirely. The walls around him were ice, white, blue-veined, completely featureless. The cold was absolute. The only sounds were the mechanical hum of the winch and his own breathing bouncing off the shaft walls. Then, over a mile down, something changed. The ice stopped, not gradually, it simply ended, and the walls around him shifted to something else, something smooth, almost metallic, a surface with a faint sheen that caught his headlamp and threw it back at him in a way that ice does not. A surface that had no business being a mile beneath an Antarctic ice sheet. The temperature changed, the acoustics changed, even the quality of the air changed, like stepping from one room into another, he told her, like crossing a threshold. He stepped off the platform into a space that was clearly, unmistakably not natural. The cavity opened around him, enormous in every direction, and on the walls of that space there were markings, symbols, geometric patterns, unlike any writing system anyone on his team had ever encountered, unlike anything in any linguistic database, unlike anything human history has ever recorded. The team stood in total silence, flashlights cutting through darkness that had not been disturbed in thousands of years. And then he saw it, set into the far wall. Not a crack, not a gap, not a stress fracture in the ice. A doorway, constructed, framed, deliberate, leading somewhere deeper into the structure. His hands were shaking. He could feel his own pulse in his ears. The team was not cleared to go further. That required authorizations none of them held. But he watched as scientists and military personnel in specialized equipment formed up and prepared to enter. They moved with the practiced calm of people who had done this before, who knew the layout, who had been inside, who were not seeing this for the first time. He was sent back to the surface. He received a substantial financial payment. He signed a non-disclosure agreement that carried criminal prosecution clauses, and he carried what he had seen in total silence for years, until the cancer diagnosis made silence feel like a betrayal of something larger than himself. He told Linda, "People should know we found something down there, something that changes everything we think we know about history." He died not long after that interview.
And it's a huge mystery what happened between 34 million and 33 million years ago. And that is when ice began rapidly to build up to 2 miles and in a few places 3 miles on this round continent.
The silence that screamed. In late 2023, Linda Moulton Howe began releasing portions of what she calls her comprehensive Antarctic report through earthfiles.com. After 25 years of investigation, 15 or more verified testimonies, confirmed coordinates, confirmed names and affiliations, she decided the world had waited long enough. She published specific coordinates where witnesses had reported exposed structures or underground access points. She shared declassified Operation High Jump documents with redacted sections that hint at objectives far beyond the establishment of research stations. She presented anonymized testimony transcripts with enough credential detail to establish the veracity of her sources. She compiled satellite imagery showing deliberate data obscuration over the exact areas her witnesses had identified, and then she issued a direct challenge to every government, every research institution, and every independent scientist who had the tools to look. The evidence is there. She told the world exactly where to look. The response from every implicated government, the United States, Russia, China, was identical. Total silence. No corrections. No lawsuits. No charges of defamation. No official statement calling her investigation fiction. No press release. No scientist dispatched to publicly debunk her coordinates. Nothing. Just silence so complete and so uniform that it can only be described as deliberate. Think carefully. about what that silence means. Linda Moulton Howe is not an anonymous blogger. She is an Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist with a 40-year career built on verified sources and documented evidence. When someone with that profile publicly accuses multiple world governments of running a 70-year cover-up involving ancient structures and recovered technology beneath Antarctic ice, the normal response, the response any government would take if the allegations were false, is swift, emphatic denial. It is easy to discredit a false claim. One official statement, one press conference, one letter from a government legal team, and the story collapses. They said nothing. All of them. Not one word. Linda says that silence is the loudest confirmation she has ever received. And Grok's analytical framework, when applied to historical patterns of government response to false versus true sensitive disclosures, reaches the same conclusion. Blanket silence across multiple sovereign governments in response to specific, credentialed, documented allegations is not consistent with the behavior pattern of governments responding to fabrication. It is consistent with the behavior pattern of governments that cannot deny something without confirming it.
We're dealing with ice-penetrating, ground-penetrating radar. We know a lot about what is 2 miles and 3 miles down. It isn't being shared with the public, but our government and probably other governments know quite a bit.
What history looks like if they're right. Here is the question you need to sit with. If even part of what these witnesses described is accurate, if there really are structures beneath the Antarctic ice that predate the last ice age, what does that mean for everything we think we know about human history? The mainstream timeline of human civilization places the earliest complex societies in Mesopotamia and Egypt, roughly 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. The oldest known monumental architecture, the temples at Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, has been dated to approximately 12,000 years before the present. And that discovery alone was so disruptive to the established timeline that it took archaeologists decades to fully accept its implications. Now consider what it would mean if a civilization with the engineering capacity to construct massive urban complexes existed over 12,000 years ago. Not in the Middle East, not in Asia, but on a continent that was then temperate and habitable and is now buried under miles of ice following a catastrophic geological and climate event. Consider what it would mean if that civilization developed technologies that current human engineering cannot replicate. If it used materials with properties that our most advanced metallurgy cannot yet produce. If it left behind functional devices that modern scientists are studying right now in classified facilities, trying to understand how they work, it would mean that human history, as we have constructed it, is not wrong in its details. It is wrong in its foundations. It would mean that advanced human or human-level intelligence did not begin with Sumer or Egypt. It began somewhere else, much earlier, and was erased by a catastrophe so complete that almost nothing survived except what was buried beneath ice at the bottom of the world. And it would mean that multiple governments have known this for over 70 years and have made a deliberate decision that humanity is not ready or not permitted to know. Grok AI's analysis of the sociological and political suppression patterns surrounding Antarctica reaches a sobering conclusion. The level and duration of coordinated secrecy across multiple sovereign governments with competing geopolitical interests is unprecedented in the modern era. Nations that disagree on almost everything have maintained uniform silence on this topic across administrations, across decades, across changes of government and ideology. The only category of secret that produces that kind of cross-national, multi-generational silence is a secret so large and so destabilizing that every power that knows it has independently concluded that disclosure would be more dangerous than concealment. What secret is large enough to unite the United States, Russia, and China in silence?
When you know that you are 2 miles down and you're looking at these ceilings that have no support structures, he said it's incomprehensible to the human mind when you know where you are and you know how much weight there is above.
What comes next and why it matters now? Linda Moulton Howe is 81 years old. many of the witnesses who trusted her with the most dangerous information of their lives are gone. The Navy flight engineer who started all of this with a phone call in 1998 died in 2019. The NORAD officer, her most critical source, the one whose testimony connected 20 years of scattered accounts into a single coherent picture, died in 2022. Others followed. Linda says she realized at a certain point that she was becoming the last living thread between the witnesses and the world, the last person who held all of it together. And when that realization hit her, it did not just motivate her, it terrified her. She has placed copies of her full investigation, including testimony from witnesses who agreed to be identified after their deaths, with multiple institutions to preserve the material. She is preparing a documentary that will bring these accounts together in full for the first time. And Grok AI's role in this is not over. Researchers who have been working with the AI to cross-reference her data against newly available satellite analysis tools, updated geological surveys, and emerging whistleblower disclosures say the picture continues to sharpen. Every new data point fed into the analytical framework either contradicts the hypothesis, and so far, very few have, or adds another layer of confirmation to a pattern that has been building for over 70 years. The question is no longer whether something is down there. Too many credentialed, independent witnesses have described the same thing for that question to remain credibly open. The questions now are harder. What exactly is it? How old is it? And who built it? What has been recovered? What is currently being studied?
In the case of that expedition in early 2017, we used a very special seafloor drill rig that hasn't been used before in Antarctica.
What does it mean for the story we have told ourselves about who we are and where we came from? And, perhaps most importantly, who decided that you were not allowed to know? Linda Moulton Howe says her goal has never been to demand blind belief. She wants people to examine the testimonies, assess the credentials, look at the suppressed coordinates, and decide for themselves. These were real people, professionals, men and women who built careers on precision and accountability, and who, in their final years, chose truth over silence. Their testimonies are recorded. Their coordinates are published. The data gaps that Grok's analysis has now mapped with unprecedented clarity correspond exactly to what they described. The information is out there. The only remaining question is whether enough people will look. Eturo, Antarctica has kept its secret for a very long time. Through Operation High Jump and the Antarctic Treaty, through decades of classified radar surveys and confiscated core samples, through scrubbed satellite imagery, lifetime NDAs, and the systematic disappearance of every piece of physical evidence that surfaced. Through the deaths of the men who saw it firsthand and carried the weight of it until they could not carry it any longer. But secrets have a weight of their own, and the longer they are kept, the heavier they become. Grok AI has now done something that no human investigator working alone could have accomplished. It has taken the full body of suppressed, scattered, and independently verified data and shown us the architecture underneath it, the pattern that was always there, the coherence that deliberate fragmentation was designed to hide. What that architecture reveals is this: something ancient, massive, and engineered is beneath the Antarctic ice. Multiple governments have known for over 7 decades, and the reason it is still a secret has less to do with the logistics of containment and more to do with a question that no government has yet decided how to answer. What happens to everything humanity believes about itself when the answer finally comes out? If this investigation has shaken something loose in you, if you find yourself asking questions you were not asking an hour ago, then share this video with someone who deserves to ask the same questions. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, because Antarctica is not finished revealing itself, and neither are we.